Welcome to the Due Diligence Podcast, where we explore how leaders make and execute their biggest decisions, from transactions to founding organizations to career pivots and beyond. This podcast is produced by Sleeping Giant Capital. We connect executive talent and capital to invest in West Michigan businesses. To learn more, visit us at sleepinggiantcapital.com or stop by our office in downtown Kalamazoo.
Hi, my name is Doug Lepisto, co-founder of Sleeping Giant Capital. Today, my co-host Derek McIver and I spoke with Bill Johnston, chairman of Greenleaf Trust, about culture, the next generation of business leaders, and adopting a long-term growth mindset. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Bill, it's good to see you again, spend time with you again today.
Well, it's always great to spend time with you guys. So you're doing great, innovative things at the university, and that always turns my crank, so I'm always glad to do it. Yeah.
So I'm going to start off with three terms that you use a lot. Putting on your track shoes, being the village storyteller, and let me see if I get this one right, the chief provocateur.
Right.
So three terms all about culture.
Right.
And we spent a lot of time learning from you about how you think about culture. What brought you on this journey to see culture as the key to the success that you've had at Greenleaf and in your other endeavors?
Yeah, so kind of early in my career, finance career, I'm trying to find really good companies for my clients to own, right? And companies that, whether they were publicly traded or not, that you liked what that company was doing. You liked the product or the service. But beyond that, you liked the people, and you liked why that company was successful. And so trying to sort that out, why are some companies successful and others aren't during the same economic cycles? Maybe in the same sectors, maybe with products that looked almost identical. Why did some win and others didn't? And that kind of drove my inquiry process. I needed to know that. I needed to understand that. To me, operating income statements and balance sheets and pro formas are, sometimes the figment of somebody's imagination, their numbers, but what makes those numbers? It's the people, right? And so I really wanted to get into that. And in trying to figure that out, that drove me to, works like Good to Great, Built to Last, How the Mighty Fall. And those were some pretty interesting notions that Jim Collins had in those works and his associates and the research that they did. So I was really interested in that, and as I was starting my own company, what I wanted to make sure was at the core was that we understood who we were in terms of mission and vision and our business culture and how that business culture differentiated us, not made us the same. But how did it differentiate us from our competition? And what I found in doing all of that research and reading that research was that those companies that had a defined business culture, that everybody in the company knew what the culture was, and more importantly, that they were aligned with the culture, that it meant something to them, that those companies were more successful than others. And it doesn't have to just be in a for-profit organization. It could be in a nonprofit organization too. You have to have a defining culture. What are the core pillars of your culture? And so those were very personal to me. One, I wanted no conflicts of interest between what it was that we did and the clients that we served. So our interest had to be tied at the hip. If our clients did better, we did better. I knew that it had to be in a spirit of continuous improvement and collective wisdom because I didn't know all the answers. But I knew that we had to intentionally beat back any hubris that success gives you. And so the one way you do that is you organize institutionally processes that require you to ask how you can do what you're doing better for the sake of your customer, for the sake of your client. And I wanted to do that in a collective wisdom setting where we had teams of people, not just individuals serving our clients. And so those became the initial pillars of our culture. And then because we were in an industry that had some embarrassments, financial services, and because there was fraud, and because a lot of regulation exists because of fraud in our industry, I wanted to have honest and honorable as a part of that. And so, that pillar of wrapping all of those other cultural pillars with honest and honorable was there. And that was what we began with as our pillars of our core culture, and that's what those pillars are today, the same pillars. And I think that's what helps navigate through changing times, through different economic climates. So technology will change, climate changes, weather changes, geopolitical events change, domestic political events change, but the core pillars of our business culture don't change. That's the what we do. And then the how is the people part. It's the workplace culture. And that became kind of the second revelation, if you will, is that companies that succeed not only have those core cultures, the pillars of their culture that remain the same and are in alignment with all who are working in the company, but they're a talent-based organization. They recognize that talent themes are important, that various roles in the company require different talents, not the same talent. And so understanding the behavioral science behind talent-based selection, recruitment, was really the next part of the evolution of growth in our company. And once we adopted the discipline of making sure that we were selecting talents possessed with to meet talents required, it changed everything about how we were building that workplace culture. And so an investment in the human capital side of the business, an investment in building a great workplace culture to multiply the business culture. You mentioned track shoes. What I always say is that we obviously want teams of people who love lacing up their track shoes every morning. But people don't do that if they're not lacing up their track shoes with other people that are lacing up their track shoes. And so what we learned early on as our literacy grew about being a talent-based organization was that was the amplifier, that was the multiplier of the business culture. And so we continue to invest in that. It's not just the recruitment, the selection, it's also the onboarding and the coaching and the leading and the succession planning that occurs. Growth has implications. Leading a high growth organization is as challenging as trying to manage a declining organization. It's just a lot more fun, is a lot more positive. But you have to have leaders ready before you need them. And so the whole idea of having an arc of development that begins with selection and then onboarding and coaching and leading creates the opportunity for that succession planning and creates the opportunity to have emerging leaders emerging when that growth requires that you do that. When you look at the geometric growth in our organization and the numbers of people we have today, some of that is predictable, but then you look at it in retrospect and you say, wow, that's a huge change. And that's the implication that growth has. Some people would like to say we have a growth plan. I prefer to say we have a plan to grow. And that growth really results from having that differentiated business culture multiplied by that workplace culture.
Now your role you've described as village storyteller. What is, and it's easy to talk. It's easy to talk about culture at a high level, but what does that look like on a day-to-day for your role specifically? What are you doing, saying, being involved with that emphasizes and strengthens that culture?
Yeah. So if 1/3 of your company is new every 2 years in terms of the human capital, if you don't have keepers of the culture, if you don't have the village storytellers, if you don't have the people that can relate the importance of those pillars of your core business culture that differentiate, if you don't have people that are disciplined to recruit, select, onboard, coach, and lead, and believe in that process, then the typical inertias that are always there in organizations will wear away at it, right? It's like water falling on a rock. The rock is hard. But over time, that water smooths whatever surface was on that rock, unless you keep the water off the rock. So if the rock's important in its original configuration and you let water fall on it, then eventually it won't be in that configuration. And I always, when people say, if you're going to preach, don't whisper, I don't whisper as the keeper of the culture, and I don't want other people to whisper either. I want people to stand up for that culture. And what that means is that when an organization tries to do something that's contrary to the culture, that you have those village storytellers and you have the keepers of the culture that hold up their hands and say, whoa, 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 whoa. How is that in alignment with who we are and what we do and how we do it? And you need that, and you need to build those processes into what it is that you do in an intentional way. It can't be serendipitous. It can't be by chance. You have to institutionalize it. You have to have continuous improvement processes that constantly force the people in your company to ask a question from the client's side of the desk always, or from the customer's side of the desk always. And that is, how is it that we can do what it is that we do better next year than we did it this year? And then to pick the 4 or 5 things that are critically more important, because I don't know how you fix more than that. But you can fix 4 or 5, and you can add to it. And if you do that, if you institutionalize it, then you beat away that institutional hubris that always comes from success, thinking that you're better than you are. So you always have to ask it in a way that doubts that you're as good as you think you are. So, it's like you don't confuse a bull market for brains, right? And you don't confuse a bear market for lack of brains. They're the opposite sides of the same coin. So in a bull market, don't think you're that good. In a bear market, don't think you're that bad. But always ask yourself, how can I do this better? And so we institutionalize that. And when you do that, it becomes a part of your DNA. But with 1/3 of your company being new every 2 years, you can't afford to assume that it's going to be in everybody's DNA. You have to design the processes into it so it is. And you know that it is when you see people that are gathering on their own to create solutions for problems that they've identified, and they're not waiting for that institutional methodology to do that. They're just doing it because it's in our DNA. Right?
So let's zoom out a little bit from culture to another C that matters a lot to you, which is community. Sleeping Giant is obviously looking to invest in that next generation of business leaders here in West Michigan in the community. You've been involved here in the Kalamazoo community in many ways for a long time. What is that next generation of business leaders need here in Kalamazoo in West Michigan? What's your advice to them? Kind of now that you've been a part of the community, you've grown a successful business here and throughout the state. What does the next generation need? What's your advice to them?
Well, I've had the privilege of being involved with Southwest Michigan First, which is our regional economic development agency, for over 20 years, since its inception. And one of the privileges that I have in that is being able not just to meet and talk with other business owners and presidents of organizations, companies in Southwest Michigan, 7-county region. I also have the privilege of being in their businesses, of walking through their manufacturing facilities, of engaging with them in understanding the brilliance of commerce that is going on in our region. And nobody should ever make the mistake that there isn't, creativity and ingenuity and really, really great business that's being done in Southwest Michigan. I believe, strongly in the state of Michigan, the history of our commerce, the amount of intellectual capacity that's in the state, and the transfer of that intellect and that knowledge. We have been saying for the last almost 2 decades that there's a tremendous transfer of ownership of privately owned businesses in the state of Michigan, and that's true. We have a lot of privately owned business. We have a lot of publicly traded, but the majority of the citizens in the state of Michigan work for privately held companies and companies of less than 1,000 employees. There's really good stuff happening in those companies, really imaginative, creative stuff that's happening in those companies. And I've had that privilege of seeing that. And I think we have a lot of benefits, particularly in Southwest Michigan. We have in our presence a wonderful premier doctoral I high research university. We have wonderful colleges, private colleges. We have really great community college systems. We have the ability to increase the abundance of knowledge, information, technology, and the transfer of that information and technology and the digital transformation of that. And I see that happening in many, many companies. And as we work with, from the economic development side, as we work with leaders of companies, if we were to ask them what is their number one need, they're going to respond with talent. And they're going to respond with needing more talent than they have. And if there's any, engine needing more fuel, that fuel is talent. And companies routinely say we could do more if we had more talent. And so I think it's really matching that need for talent with the processes, then the institutions for the flow of that talent. Right? And that's what we've been working on. And retaining talent in a community has a lot of what I would call sticky points. And part of that, a major part of that, is opportunity. In translating, particularly from educational institutions, whether those are vocational and tech ed skill centers, whether those are community colleges, whether those are universities, private colleges, is making sure that we're connecting the dots between that thirst for opportunity and the demand for that talent. So we commonly refer to that as internships and apprenticeships, right? And if those are serendipitous, it's not enough. If those are by chance, it's not enough. So as a community, as an economic development agency, we have a real need to supply that talent pipeline to those companies that are doing great things and have a need for more talent. And we also have a responsibility to more formalize at those educational institutions, all of them that I described. So, when students are sophomores in high school, they should be being exposed to those apprenticeship and internship opportunities. And certainly in every discipline at the university level, there should be those internships. We know that retention and persistence for university students and graduation rates all go up when there's the connective tissue between internships and what you're studying in the classroom. You know that from your experience with students. The lights that go on, that get brighter as a result, the connections to, yes, this makes sense. Yes, this is what I want to do. These are the areas of inquiry that I want to be involved in. This is the research that I want to do. These are the differences I want to make. All of the studies that have been done about employee satisfaction all amplify that progress and feeling of contribution and that your work matters all have huge levers on employee satisfaction. And when you think about that, it's natural. It makes sense, right? If you feel better about your day because you've made progress and your labor has made an impact on whatever it is that your organization is doing, whether that's in manufacturing or finance or healthcare or a nonprofit organization or education, whatever it is, if you leave that day of labor feeling like, wow, I have made a difference, it matters that I was here today. And people get to that when they're in alignment with their talents and the talents required. And people are more likely to be aligned with that if they have had internship opportunities, apprenticeship opportunities, the ability to explore early on and connect the dots between what their talents are, what they're passionate about, and what it is that they're learning in the classroom or the laboratory or the skill center or the community college or wherever it is that they're at. When all of those are aligned, it's the wind's at your back. And the recruitment and the retention of talent, the wind is at your back. And the supply chain of talent, the wind is at your back and not in your face. But all of that has to be intentional, right? So you asked a question about the next generation. And I don't think that there's any one generation that has a bigger thirst than the others for that. I think every generation has the same thirst to achieve that. But communities that will grow and communities that will differentiate themselves are communities that get that, plan for it, invest for it, and create those opportunities for those pathways of emerging talent to see, get through that connective tissue, to get to those experiences that retains that talent here and grows those companies here for generations.
Thread a couple things together. You said a third of the organization being new every year. I just want to clarify that's growth,
right?
Because it's massive growth. And so it seems like you guys are able to do a lot of things to attract that talent, retain them, and bring them to Kalamazoo and to your company.
Right.
And so what can other business leaders who are working with you at Southwest Michigan First doing great things, what are some of the things that you guys have done that they can do? Because from my understanding, you guys have reached back to high school quite a bit and developed programs in the high schools. Because the third new every year is attracting a lot of talent and retaining that. So what can maybe listeners that are not involved currently, what can they do? What are some practices they can adopt, and who should they reach out to learn more at Southwest Michigan First? I guess is two things.
Well, I'll use a specific example because it tells the story well. So fairly early on, 5 years into creating Greenleaf Asset Management, which was the company that then became Greenleaf Trust. As we were looking for additional talent, what I found was there was no diversity in the talent that was coming to our organization, and that was being presented by leaders as this is somebody that we should bring on. And I kept saying, I'm waiting for you to bring me more diverse talent, and you're not doing it. And so that's a part of your principal accountabilities. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of you have to do that. And so what we found is that at the university level in the schools of finance, the student population was not very diverse at all. And by the way, that wasn't just at Western Michigan University. That was at the University of Michigan. That was at Michigan State. It was at every university. And so we said, if we're going to change that condition in our company, we've got to change that condition where we're recruiting students from. And so we created a scholarship program called Greenleaf Scholars, and also the Greenleaf Internship Program, which is now the largest scholarship program at the university. Now, I mentioned that not out of hubris, but saying if businesses are going to change the condition they're in, then they have to invest in changing that condition. That program, now over 20 years old, has literally changed the diversity of our company in finance and trust and fiduciary administration. It has changed the face of the College of Finance at the University of Western Michigan University too. And so your question, Derek, is an important question. If a company is finding difficulty in recruiting talent, it has to invest in the process of recruiting talent. If you're going to take a passive approach and say, I'm waiting for talent to come, you'll continue to wait for talent to come because the competition for talent is intense. And the competition for talent is global. And that means that Kalamazoo, Southwest Michigan, is in the battle for that talent, not just in Southwest Michigan, not just in the state of Michigan, not just in the Midwest region, but it's a global competition for talent. And that global competition for talent will only get greater. And so if you're a business in Kalamazoo, Southwest Michigan, and you are finding that you don't have enough of whatever the talent is that you are seeking, you have to invest in that pipeline of talent and in growing that pipeline. And that means that you have to introduce pipeline programs in middle school, and you have to invest in those pipeline programs in high school. We've broken ground on a new tech ed center for Kalamazoo Regional Education Service area. And that's going to serve the technical education in a beautiful new facility, state-of-the-art, and that's wonderful. And it's going to be up and running in 2025. Companies have to invest in that. They have to invest in the pipeline of students. They have to invest in apprenticeships. It has to be intentional, has to be methodical, has to be persistent. It has to be every year. And it has to be a part of the operating income statement. Companies in finance have to do that. Companies in healthcare have to do that. That is what makes and builds great communities faster than it otherwise would. You have those intentional efforts, intentional pipeline programs, intentional awareness of the entire bandwidth of industries and industry sectors that are in communities, so that people don't say ignorantly, and I'm using the word ignorantly because it just implies lack of knowledge, not intent to have lack of knowledge, just lack of knowledge. If people ignorantly think there aren't creative companies in Southwest Michigan, they're doing that because of the lack of exposure and the lack of experience and lack of knowledge that otherwise they would understand. They're really great creative companies in Kalamazoo, in Southwest Michigan. And so who's responsible for doing that? You know, and it's easy to say somebody else's, but I think that the people that need the talent are responsible for advertising what it is that they're doing and exposing students to those opportunities so that people get a fuller exposure to what all the career opportunities are, so that we don't have a situation where people think, well, you know, Kalamazoo is not the financial capital of the world, so, you know, there can't be any opportunities for people to graduate with a degree in finance or a degree in accounting, and that's wrong. That's wrong. But part of what's wrong is we're not connecting those dots through internships and apprenticeships and exposure and creating. It's one of the reasons we created the Wealth Builders program at the high school level, is to get students before they're ready to go to college, before they're thinking about that, to get them understanding that there are careers in finance in Kalamazoo, to get that. That's why we've created the pipeline program for the medical school, is, you know, create that awareness earlier so that people get exposure to ideas, people get exposure to the variety of industries. I think you can't take a passive approach to it. It has to be active. How do you differentiate yourself? How does a community differentiate itself? It has to have intentional programs doing it. And fortunately, we've got a lot of great people at Southwest Michigan First working on that stuff every day, and more is never enough. Right?
How about let's talk about the next generation of owner-operators of these companies that are going to be under transition and have been under transition. You know, you have the benefit now of great experience. What lessons would you share to that next generation of CEOs, owner-operators of these small businesses as they assume a leadership position, not only of their business, but in their community?
Yeah. So you think historically in our country, largely agrarian to begin with, and then entrepreneurial in terms of delivering services or product, you know, and so we always expected that the next generation would join whatever the family enterprise was, whether it was agrarian or whether it was the local market, local hardware store, whatever the the service provider was, and then getting into manufacturing. In the state of Michigan, we think of automotive companies, and we, now this generation doesn't even know the big three, what used to be the big three, because they're far more diffused now. But there used to be over 350 automotive companies in the state of Michigan. And I use that illustration just to say that these were small enterprises. These were privately held. They weren't publicly traded large corporations. They were companies that had 5, 10, 15 people working in those companies. But every generation was just expected. It was expected that you would work in your family's business, and that worked for a while. And then as standards of living grew and people began to value education, and so families would say, well, you don't have to work in the family business if you go to college. But after you go to college and get your degree, then you have to come back and work in the family business, and that worked for a while. And then, well, if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, you can go do that. And then with each generation it evolved, and then we started saying, well, follow your dreams and pursue your talents, and we're good at that, and they believed us, and so they did. And so what happens then is that you have these privately held, family-run businesses that sometimes are 4, 5, 6 generations old or longer, but they don't have any succession plan because they're running out of family members, because family members believed them and said, you don't have to work in the family business. You can go do what you want. And so we have this transfer of businesses. And what has to happen is all of those experiences that those generations developed on their own, with family members working in the business and understanding, cost accounting and production and innovation and creativity and investment and research and development and everything that was necessary to keep those businesses going, or the service delivery businesses, and to keep them thriving. The next level of ownership also has to have those experiences. And some of those experiences come from talent, or not talent, from training and with internship programs and with apprenticeship programs and things like that. And some of them also come from programs like Sleeping Giant Capital and the Principal Leadership Program, giving students the opportunity to get involved in the understanding of what are the foundational blocks that any successful business has to have, and how do you prepare yourself for leading and understanding what those professional building blocks are, and what are those skill sets that are necessary for successful businesses. We spend a good deal of time talking about, yes, you have to have a great business culture and the pillars of that business culture, and you have to have a great workplace culture and all of the human capital principles of creating and maintaining and developing and having a great workplace culture flourish. But you, as a leader of that business, have to have fundamental business blocks within you, building blocks within you. And when you look at most people's education, and say a bachelor's in business administration or a master's in business, there weren't the courses that gave you that understanding of the building blocks of business success. That courses weren't integrated; they were isolated. They were a part of a curriculum, which is meant over the time of that curriculum, to give you this sound fundamental information. But what opportunities did you have to learn that on the job? What opportunities did you have to see that physically, visually, where you could touch it, feel it, see it? What were those? So much like the pipeline of talent for companies that need that talent, the pipeline has to be built, the competencies have to be built so that those companies that are looking for transfer of ownership have people that have in their body of work those competencies, those experiences already built, so that they're ready to take on those roles of leading a company. And that doesn't happen directly out of a bachelor's program. Some of the components can be built there, but you have to have those experiences that build to leadership opportunities, that build to the competencies of being ready to take the next step of ownership.
So let's transition now to our last one, because I think it's critical. You talked about building communities and investing at middle school, right? And so that leads to probably our last topic conversation today, but a philosophy that I think you have that we share is investing for the long term. Right. If you're investing for the short term, you're not going to build a middle school development program, right? That's a 10, 15 year pipeline before it shows up at your door. So, and in a few of our conversations, you mentioned investing from 100-year time period and looking at investments like that and how you build projects. So can you talk a little about your long-term investment strategy and why that's critical for communities and locations and companies and especially today with, your talent's a good example, but.
So we mentioned before stickiness of what causes people to stay in communities, even if their vocational opportunities change. Why do some people stay and others leave? And part of that is that because in previous generations, there have been people that have invested in things that make a community sticky, right? And so if you look at those institutions that make our community different, there was a time when Western Michigan University, then known as Western State Normal College, was going to be in Marshall, Michigan. But there were a group of people in Kalamazoo that thought that that was a mistake and that would be a detriment to Kalamazoo not to have a college in Kalamazoo. And so they lobbied and they invested and they made certain that Western State Normal College remained in Kalamazoo. And now that was in 1903. And now we have Western Michigan University here in Kalamazoo and all of the implications of that for all of those years that have created opportunity and growth in Kalamazoo. We've had people that 100 years ago or more decided that we should have an art institute in Kalamazoo and a professional symphony and a civic theater. And we've had people that have said that we should have a medical school. And, those things that people were looking out, not to plant a tree and sit in the shade of the tree that they planted, but to, grow that tree for somebody else to sit in the shade of. And so you have to have a community where people are willing to invest for the longer term. And when you look at the philanthropic nature of Kalamazoo, that's one of the privileges that we have had as a community, is that there have been people in hundreds of years of history of Kalamazoo that have been willing to invest in the longer term, whether that's, hospitals, educational institutions, cultural institutions, government, to fund those things that are necessary to make a difference in people's lives so that there's greater community. And then I think from a commerce standpoint, there's a lot of discipline that comes from publicly traded companies that's important, and we should adopt those things that are important. But there's there's also some things that are counterproductive, and so if we're looking at quarterly income and profit results, if the reason we're looking at them is to tell us a story of direction, that's one thing. But that 90 days can't be the determinant of great companies. And so we have to be able to look beyond those 90-day periods of time. And so if you have a company that's, this is 2023, and if their focus is only on 2023, I question the long-term success of that company. That company really should have a plan where they're talking at least of 2030. And then 2023 means something in terms of 2030, but 2023 by itself doesn't mean much. It has to mean something in terms of that 2030 plan. And when we're talking about pipelines, when we're talking about investing in talent, we're talking about investing in community infrastructure as a part of your operating income statement. That's what gets significant growth. That's what differentiates some communities from others, and why some communities grew at rates greater than others, is because of that willingness to look and devote a portion of your operating income statement to that investment in the community. And I think it's my observation that Kalamazoo and West Michigan has had more of that over the last 5-6 decades than some other communities have. And that has made a difference for us. More is never enough. We can always do more. But you have to cultivate that next generation of leaders, the next generation of storytellers, next generation of keepers of the culture too, that believe in the value of that.
Maybe we'll go one more question here on the long term, and then we'll wrap up. Easier, it sounds easy, but to think 20, 30 years into the future, difficult. I mean, difficult to start to imagine that. What's your advice for people as because it's easy to start to project into 3 months, but to think 20, 30 years out, how do you approach that?
I think it's a great recruitment tool myself. If I'm trying to recruit talent to our companies, and the talent is in the 20 to 30-year-old, and if I can't answer a question that they have even before they ask it, of what's our future 20 years from now? Why would they hitch their wagon to our company? Why would they have their family grow in our community if I don't have the answer to that question? If I'm not thinking about where should our company be 20 years from now, if I can't have some tangible thoughts about where's this community going to be 20 years from now, why would they hitch their wagon to us? So I think it's a great recruitment tool. You should be able to differentiate your business culture and your workplace culture for the talent you're trying to recruit, because I really do believe it's a global competition for talent. So if that talent is going to hitch their wagon to some Greenleaf company in Kalamazoo, Michigan, there ought to be some definitive reasons why. What are their dinner table conversations like? What are they going home to their significant others and talking about? What is the conversation around their home about the work that we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it? And what are the implications for their families? What are the implications for their children? To me, that's a huge recruitment tool. And it's not insignificant, and it shouldn't be. To think that the people that you're recruiting to come to your company have only one option, they have lots of options. And then when you've invested in them and you have invested in not only who they were when you recruited them, but who they are as a result of your coaching and leading and succession planning, and you have taken that big ball of talent now and given them so many experiences and run plays with them, and they are hugely different in a positive way than they were when they walked in the door. And now somebody else is whispering in their ear and recruiting them. What do you want the stickiness to be? Is it just about money? Do you want to fight that battle just about money? Or do you want to fight that battle about what you're doing, where you're going, and what their role is in that future? If you don't have a plan for growth, how do you talk honestly about that? How do you look them in the eye and tell them, we've got great plans for you, we just don't know what they are? You should have a plan for them, and you should have a plan for your company. So I think it's a great recruitment tool myself.
Great. We'll wrap up with 3 short answer questions. First one is, what is the thing you wish you learned in college that you didn't?
I didn't understand the concept of behavioral science in work until I was 45. I wish I'd known that when I was in my 20s. So when you think about those things that you like to do, and when you do them at levels that most of your peers don't. And you see the evidence of that when people are in elementary school. We've all had that experience. There was something that we did that our friends didn't or couldn't, or we did easier. Or when we did it, we liked to do it more than they liked to do it. And that was that something in us was telling us, that's talent. That's not skill. It's not experience, that's talent. But we didn't know that. And I wish I had known that connection earlier. I wished that would be one thing. The other thing is I wished I knew organizational success was not by chance. It was by design, as was organizational failure. It wasn't by chance. It was by design. Those would be 2 powerful lessons for any freshman in a business, first-year business, orientation to business school. That would be hugely important for them to know, if they could know that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. A little more lighthearted one. What's your favorite? It could be finance, M&A, investing, what's your favorite term? A term that you think is that either sounds good or is overused?
Well, I think talent and culture sound good, and they're overused and misunderstood.
Okay.
And that's because it's just, there are certain words that people use in certain decades, and, right. And so people use talent and culture, and the majority of people that use them don't have a clue as to what you have to do to first grow your literacy in that. That's a journey. That's not a light switch. That's a journey. And you have to invest in that. And most people don't.
Okay. And final question, if there's a hole in the wall here in Kalamazoo or in West Michigan, restaurant, beach, park, bar, what would you want to give a shout out to? Off the beaten path here in Kalamazoo or West Michigan that most people don't know enough about. What would you recommend?
Totally unprepared for that that most people don't know about.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one. The Gilmore Car Museum.
Mm.
Now,
That's
there's
a good answer.
Yeah, because on a relevance basis, and the amount of history that's there. So, the museum founded on telling the story of American history through the automobile. So, that connection. But the quality of it is amazing. And I've been to a lot of automotive museums, so I know that it is. But I think almost universally when people go there, they say, wow, I didn't know this existed. And I think the awareness of that is way below what the quality of it is. So
that's a good one. Wonderful. Well, Bill, appreciate the time, and it's always great to spend time with you and learn from you. So really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Doug and Derek, and thanks for all you're doing and the wonderful programs that you're leading, and keep doing great work.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us.